The Pinkerton National Detective Agency has one of the most fascinating stories in American history. It's a tale of immigrant success and of failure, of innovation, justice served, but also justice revoked. It's an organization that has done so much to shape the landscape of America, but outside of history buff circles, few people know who they are. I mean, unless you've played Red Dead Redemption, then you kind of have an idea. Take-Two Interactive and Rockstar Games were actually sued by the still very active Pinkerton Agency for their depiction of Pinkerton agents in the game, both for the use of the Pinkerton name and portraying the agents as villains. So you really have to tread lightly when making any content about them. So to be clear, this video is about the history of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, and it is for educational purposes only. I have no agenda either for or against the agency, but also if you get mad, it doesn't matter because I have zero assets, so don't bother suing me. It seems like companies have two lives: who they are when they are run by the people who founded them, and who they are after those people are gone. For the agency, that man was Allan Pinkerton. He immigrated to America from Scotland in 1842, but before that, he had been a fierce advocate for workers' rights. And if you know where this story goes, that might be a little surprising to hear. Allan grew up in extreme poverty and was homeless by the time he was an adolescent. The work he could get, he got as a cooper, which is someone who makes barrels. Yeah, by the way, if your last name is Cooper, someone in your family probably made barrels at some point. Okay, so let's set the stage a little bit. The 1830s were a politically volatile time for the UK. Workers were protesting for better wages and being met with a lot of hostility. The London Working Men's Association drafted this list of demands they called the People's Charter of 1838. Demands like universal voting rights for every man over the age of 21, secret ballots so that voters couldn't be intimidated, and getting rid of property qualifications for becoming a member of parliament. And that one was huge because the barrier meant that if you wanted to run for parliament, you had to already be wealthy enough to own land, meaning the system that was in place was already working in your favor. And this was the environment that Pinkerton found himself joining the Glasgow Universal Suffrage Association. But this didn't end well for him, and he ended up in a lot of trouble with the law because of his involvement with their demonstrations, and this is what drove him to immigrate to America. Meanwhile, America is having its own political upheaval. He arrives about 20 years before the beginning of the Civil War, and there's a lot of tension brewing between the states and the federal government. This was also during the rise of the abolitionist movement, a movement against slavery in America, led by people like Frederick Douglass. And being from the UK, where slavery had already been abolished for years, Pinkerton was vehemently anti-slavery, and his home even became a stop on the Underground Railroad for slaves fleeing the South. His early history really shows Pinkerton as someone with a strong moral compass, who really didn't care if something was legal or not if he felt it was morally wrong, and most importantly, someone who was willing to do whatever it takes to get the results he wanted. But the real change for Pinkerton came from the railroads. In the 1850s, railroads were a legal and logistical catastrophe. They carried incredible valuable cargo like gold, cash, livestock, you name it, and there was still no national police force. These trains were crossing state after state, jurisdiction after jurisdiction, meaning local sheriffs had really limited range and power. And this created the perfect conditions for robbery: value, opportunity, and little oversight. And it wasn't just gangs on horseback catching trains like in the movies either. A lot of the time, the problem was also railroad employees themselves skimming valuables from the cargo. So the demand was there, and Pinkerton supplied it by founding the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, a police force for hire aimed directly at combating railroad robbery. Well, at least at first. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, let me tell you. The agency was very successful at their work and later were involved in bringing down infamous criminals like Jesse James, Butch Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, they don't sound like real people. They sound like characters from a book, and it's amazing that they're real. During the Civil War, the agency aligned themselves with the Union and quickly got to work on another one of their specialities: intelligence. The agency would later go on to have a very diverse history, a history that when you look at one individual act can cast them either as the heroes or the villains. But when taken as a whole, they come off as a much more ethically complex organization. For instance, one of the most famous Pinkerton agents in all of American history is Kate Warren, the first female law enforcement officer. And I know that sounds very 50% of these dictators should be women. Your objection has been accepted by the board. But come on, she was a spy for the Union. That's so cool. And she was instrumental in thwarting an assassination attempt on Abraham Lincoln. I mean, not the last one, but not to throw shade, but a U.S. Marshal was in charge of Lincoln's protection that night at the theater. Dude was clearly not up to the task, apparently. Nice job, Ward. Where'd you learn to be a bodyguard? The toilet store? So Allan Pinkerton, as a person, had no love for slavery and no compunctions about hiring a woman at a time when both were controversial. And those are admirable qualities. Anyway, then there's everything else. I do want to take a moment to thank my supporters over on Patreon. You are the only reason that these videos are possible. I am a single mom and I do live in low-income housing. So if you want to support me making more of these videos, you can head over to patreon.com. But wait, there's more! You can also get this new merch I designed. I Ain't No Revenue Agent is probably one of my favorite designs I've done in a while, and I think it's fitting for the topic. It was inspired by a commenter, so if you're one of my frequent commenters, don't be surprised if one of the things you write ends up on a t-shirt in the merch store. Okay, back to the video. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency's early years were filled with exciting developments and noble accomplishments, but as time wore on, the agency turned its talents toward a much less virtuous exploit: union busting. They used methods like infiltrating union ranks to gather intelligence, intimidating workers, and showing up to demonstrations, and that last one got really nasty. One of the most deadly altercations was the Homestead Strike of 1892. Okay, here's the scoop on this one. Andrew Carnegie is the head of Carnegie Steel. Insanely rich dude. He's like the Bill Gates of his day. He wanted to update one of his factories in Pennsylvania, but that takes money he was happy to take out of his workers' wages. He tasks a man named Henry Frick to implement all the changes at the factory. And Frick is like, Frick, the workers are not going to like this. He figures they're going to strike, and they totally are. So he thinks we better get a backlog of steel products made to smooth over any gaps in production that might happen if there's a strike. This does not go well for him. He's pushing an already exhausted workforce under dangerous conditions to produce more for less. And all he ended up with were a lot of really angry steelworkers, injuries, and deaths. His response was to post a notice saying that Carnegie Steel would not be negotiating with strikers under any circumstances. I know, the audacity of a middle manager. So again, this does not go well, and 2,000 steelworkers blocked the entrance to the mill, prompting Frick to hire 300 Pinkerton agents who arrived by boat. Steelworkers and their families were shooting at them. They even fired an old Civil War cannon at them, and the Pinkertons responded by shooting back with Winchester rifles. This left 7 steelworkers dead and 3 Pinkerton agents dead, which doesn't actually sound like a lot. I'm honestly shocked at how jaded I am by modern-day violence. Right? Like 10 people. That's not even a full social studies class. Cut that joke. Cut it. No, but when you think about it, it really is horrible. Like, imagine dying at work. Imagine dying because of inter-office drama. Inexcusable. Part of me really isn't surprised that Pinkerton took Carnegie's side here. Andrew Carnegie was also a Scottish immigrant who was born into poverty and made his fortune in America, just as Pinkerton had. He was also vacationing in Scotland when Pinkerton agents were shooting his employees. History doesn't always repeat, but it sure does rhyme. It's fascinating to me to think about the mental gymnastics needed to fight in a labor movement as a young man and then run an agency that attacks those very people as an old man. I have to wonder if Pinkerton saw the problems of labor issues as really problems of the old world and not something that America struggled with. Maybe he was so sold on the idea of America that he couldn't conceive that we would have the same problems or injustices. He must have really identified with the struggles of the working class in Scotland because he was so poor, homeless even. Whereas in America, he found himself so successful, it must have been difficult to see that those problems still existed. Carnegie was also incredibly powerful and influential, and I can imagine that even if Pinkerton did have reservations, going against Carnegie at this time would have been disastrous for his career. And Pinkerton knew all too well how the world treats a poor man. Anyway, today the Pinkerton National Detective Agency works with megacorps like Amazon, Google, Meta, doing a lot of surveillance and thwarting labor disputes, allegedly, and I have no comment on their modern day shenanigans. Oh, wait, no, wait, just one. In 2023, Wizards of the Coast, the makers of Magic the Gathering, mistakenly shipped a not yet released version of a deck to a YouTuber named Old School MTG. And allegedly, after trying to contact him to return it and not getting a response, they hired a Pinkerton agent to go to his house. I was shocked to find that this YouTuber has under 8,000 subscribers. Like, that is a bit overkill, hiring a Pinkerton agent. Pinkertons have trample, everyone knows that. The story of the Pinkertons is kind of like America itself, built on ideals of freedom and justice, and just as quick to sell those ideals to the highest bidder. From fighting for the Union to fighting unions, they've always found themselves on the winning side of history. They began as a symbol of order in a lawless age, but in trying to protect power, they became part of what needed protecting from. History rarely gives us pure heroes or villains, just people and the systems they serve.